So, today we're going to dive into one of the most difficult, most charged conversations out there, colonial reparations. But we're going to look at it through a really specific lens from our source material. Not as some kind of punishment, but as a real, actual debt that, and this is the wild part, might actually be payable. Okay, let's get into it.
And right out of the gate, the source sets a really important tone here. This whole conversation, it isn't about pointing fingers. It's not about making you or me the villain for things that happened hundreds of years ago. The point is, we've all inherited a world with a deeply unbalanced ledger, and it's on us, together, to figure out what to do about it.
So, here it is, the big idea we're gonna unpack. The bill for colonialism is real, and it is mind-bogglingly huge. But instead of getting stuck on this idea of a single economy-breaking check, the source asks us to reframe the whole thing. Think of it more like a civilizational mortgage, a long-term plan paid out over generations to finally settle the account.
All right, so here's our game plan. We'll start by looking at the history. Then, we're going to tackle that really tricky argument about the so-called goods of empire. We'll look at why past attempts to fix this have failed, and then we'll get into the actual math behind this mortgage idea and see what a real plan could even look like.
First things first, though, before we can even have this conversation, we have to clear the air on some of the most common arguments you hear. So let's just face them head on.
You've heard these before, right? They're kind of the two big ones. The idea that colonization actually helped primitive people, and the other one that, hey, building empires is just what humans do. But the source material argues that this view just misses so much of the story.
And this slide right here is so important because it just completely resets our baseline. The idea that humanity was waiting for Europe to become civilized is just wrong. You had the Maya inventing the concept of zero, Polynesian navigators crossing the largest ocean on Earth using stars, Timbuktu, a massive center of learning. The source puts it so well. Civilization is a potluck. Everyone brings something to the table. And if you want to see the economic reality, look at this. It's just staggering. In 1700, before the British Empire really took hold, India's economy made up almost a quarter of the entire world's GDP. A quarter. That's about the same as all of Europe combined. By 1947, when they gained independence, it had crashed to just 4%. The source is clear. This wasn't some historical accident. It was the result of a system designed to extract wealth. So this brings us to that next big hurdle. The whole argument that, the good things that came with empire somehow make up for all the bad.
Okay, this is probably the most common defense of colonialism you'll ever hear. That you can put the good stuff, like railways, on one side of a scale, and the bad stuff, like famines and violence, on the other, and see how it all balances out. But the source asks us to completely reject that framing.
This isn't a math problem. It's not a balancing act. The railway is a real thing. And the mass grave is also a real thing. You just don't get to use one to erase the other. The argument is that we have to be able to hold both of these truths at the same time without one canceling the other out.
And here's the really simple, logical core of it. Good ideas, things like medicine and engineering, don't belong to any one group of people. They can travel on their own. I mean, look at Japan and Thailand. They are perfect examples of countries that modernized, that adopted Western tech, without being violently conquered and occupied to get it. Colonialism basically bundled progress with theft, but they were never a package deal. So if the harms are real and they can't be canceled out, why haven't we dealt with this? Well, the source argues that we've actually tried, twice, and both times we fell short for pretty much the same reason. So there were two big waves. First, right after World War II, you had political decolonization. Countries got their independence, they got new flags, but the economic systems, the messed up borders, the debt, a lot of that stayed the same. It was freedom, but on someone else's terms. Then, starting around the 90s, the focus shifted to cultural recognition. Apologies, returning artifacts from museums, all really important symbolic stuff, but it didn't do much to close that massive wealth gap.
And here's the bottom line. The source argues both attempts failed because they skipped the money. The first try gave new countries their freedom, but no real capital to actually build a new future. The second try gave recognition for past wrongs, but with no meaningful transfer of the wealth that was taken.
Which brings us, to the money. This is usually where the conversation just completely breaks down, because the numbers, they just seem impossible. But let's actually look at them.
This is the question, isn't it? The one that hangs over this entire topic.
If we actually try to calculate the cost, don't we end up with a number so huge it's basically meaningless? A number that would just bankrupt entire countries overnight? And yeah, the number is astronomical. Look at this, $19 trillion. And get this, that's just one estimate for one part of the story, slavery, in just one country, the US. It doesn't even touch on stolen land or the resources extracted from Africa, Asia, and Latin America. But this is the crucial pivot the source makes. The problem isn't really the size of the number. It's how we think about paying it. We imagine this one single, impossible check that would crater the global economy. The proposal is to stop thinking that way and start thinking of it like a mortgage, a massive debt paid off in small, manageable annual payments over centuries. And if a civilizational mortgage sounds like some kind of fantasy, get this. This is an incredible, true piece of history. In 1835, the British government took out one of the biggest loans in history, not to help the people who had been enslaved, no, to compensate the slave owners for losing their property. That debt was so massive that British taxpayers were still paying it off in 2015. So the point the source makes is pretty simple. If a country can pay off a morally backward debt for 180 years, surely we can figure out how to pay off the right one. Okay, so if the debt is real and the mortgage idea is at least plausible, what would a real plan actually look like? Well, the point isn't to invent a bunch of radical new ideas. It's about taking systems that already exist and just scaling them up. So here's what the roadmap could look like. You start by dedicating a tiny fixed piece of GDP every year to a global fund. You use things like universal basic income to redistribute wealth more broadly. You actually honor old treaties and return land, which the source points out is just basic property law for stolen goods. And yeah, you absolutely do the cultural work, returning artifacts and creating days of acknowledgement. All of it has to happen together. And this is the final, powerful question the source leaves us to think about. The goal of all this isn't to create endless guilt or punishment. The goal is closure. It's about finally getting to a point where a future generation can ask, hey, what was all that about? And we can tell them a story that has a real ending, a story that closes, not because we all just agreed to ignore it, but because the debt was finally paid.